If you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you'll call the roll.
Director Cicada? Here. Director Thomas?
Here.
Director Rennerman?
Here.
President Underhill?
Here.
And at this time, Director Davidson is absent.
Okay. We open it for public comment. At this time, members of the public may address the board on any non-agendized item. We do have one public, but he'll be addressing us later. Seeing none, we'll go on to number 3. Discussion regarding the potential for utilizing in-house counsel. Michael Minkler.
So I'm going to depart from my normal practice and actually use the podium today, if that's okay with the board.
That's what lawyers do is practice.
Sorry, what's that?
That's what lawyers do is practice.
Practice. So pulling up a PowerPoint here, but you guys have the hard copies in front of you. First, thank you all for being here on a Friday afternoon, a special board meeting on a Friday afternoon when I'm sure there might be other places you want to be. But we feel like this is a pretty important discussion. We really want to get some valuable input from the board, and we really wanted to get some input from some outside experts as well. And this was the best time for us to make all that happen. Just to give you a quick overview of how we're going to run through this today, I'll do a kind of an introduction of the topic. We'll look at historical use and the costs associated with outside counsel. Take a look at some of the future, in the near future, the upcoming legal needs that we think we're going to have. We have a couple of different scenarios that we want to try to, we wanted this to be as productive a discussion as possible. So in addition to breaking down the numbers, we wanted to try to present a couple of scenarios of what this might look like. I want to just say from the very outset that these are hypothetical scenarios. There's probably 20 other hypothetical scenarios that we could have run, but these are two that we felt like are are good for discussion purposes. Give us something, some meat on the bone to chew on and talk about. But there's lots of other ways that we could potentially go about this. And then we are very privileged today to have a couple of guest speakers. They're so important that one of them had to step out and take the call at the moment. But Brian Polson is here. Yeah, one's important, the other one, yeah, not so much. Brian Polson's here from El Dorado Irrigation District. Many of you know him. He's very active in Aqua as well, the chair of the state legislative committee. And somebody that both of these people I've known for quite some time and have a tremendous amount of respect for their expertise and their opinion. And so we're just very grateful to both of them for coming up here and wanted the board to have the opportunity to talk to some folks that are in that position once we work through all the circumstances that are specific to CCWD. So thank you, Brian and Ellen, for being here. So, we want to explore relative benefits of in-house counsel compared to our current use of outside counsel. And we want to do it within the specific context of CCWD circumstances. And I think this is something I've been thinking about for quite some time. I've had conversations with senior staff about it over the last several months. And one of the things that really changed my thinking on it was a conversation that I had with Ellen, who will be here in a few minutes, a few months ago, when I realized that She's a water district that has a staff of 20. And in my mind, it had been something that would be great, maybe something to consider, but that it was something that larger water districts did. And so hearing about her experience really kind of changed my thinking on it, and helped me realize that it's really it's unique to each water district. Whether or not it makes sense for us is not something that we can just look at another water district and say, yeah, let's take that and apply it here. There's smaller water districts that have in-house general counsel. There are much larger water districts that don't. I spoke last week, I think the contrast to Ellen, I spoke last week to Rim Scherzinger at Nevada Irrigation District, and he said they've looked at this as well, and they reached the opposite conclusion, that they just feel like they need a law firm with a deep bench that does all the different things that they need them to do, and they didn't feel like it was right for them to use in-house counsel. So it's not necessarily a question of how big your water agency is. It's more a question of what are your specific needs, unique to your district, and whether or not it makes sense for you or not. So that's really what we wanted to drill down into, and present that to the board, and hopefully we get a fruitful discussion out of it. And from my perspective, I think the main appeal of having somebody in that position would be an experienced attorney with experience that's really relevant to the needs that we have, who would be a part of the management team, would be working on CCWD business as their full-time position. And I also want to be clear from the outset here, we're not looking at this because we're not happy with Downey Brand or we have any issues with Matt Weber. I think actually we get very good representation from them. And Matt and I have talked about this. He knows that we're having this conversation. In fact, he helped us with some of the numbers that are in the presentation. He understands that this is just a conversation that we should have as a water district, and hopefully arrive at the answer that is best for us. And so he was very gracious and very professional about it. So this isn't, and none of this is necessarily a reflection on Matt or Downey Brand, but having somebody who's here full-time and focused on our issues full-time, to me, is something worth considering. I think that there are some benefits there. There's Alan. So one of the numbers that you won't see in the presentation that Rebecca just brought to my attention was, I'll bring that up later. Let's dig into it. Looking at the role of outside legal counsel.
Excuse me,
yes.
we might introduce Ellen.
Oh.
Hi, I'm Ellen Weir, General Counsel to the Grassland Water District in the San Joaquin Valley.
And I did a very glowing introduction while you were up. No, Ellen, as she said, General Counsel for Grassland Water District. I've known Ellen for more than 10 years now. And as I said before, a tremendous amount of respect for her opinion and her expertise, and really grateful for her being here today to talk to us about her experience.
Michael, where exactly is Grassland?
We're in Merced County, so western Merced County. It's about 65,000 acre district. We primarily serve water to manage wetlands, so we're a very unique water district, but we are a state water district.
So on the west side, you're over on the I-5 corridor then?
Yep, near Los Banos. We're headquartered in Los Banos.
Yeah. So unique water district, but as I was saying before, it's a consideration that is unique to each water district, and in their case it made sense. In other larger districts it doesn't, and so we just want to take a careful look at it. So we use outside counsel for all sorts of reasons, and much of this is covered by Downey Brand. Incidentally, Ellen was an associate at Downey Brand and has done work for CCWD in the past. The, so a lot of this, the general public agency stuff, our water rights and environmental work, litigation, most of our litigation and administrative proceedings is covered by Downey Brand. If we're handling, if it's an employment law or a labor relations matter, we use Liebert Cassidy for that work, including mediation and arbitration. And then bonds, so for bond counsel and complex financial transactions like the UAL loan that we did last year, those things are handled by Burke Williams. So multiple law firms with different areas of expertise, but the vast majority of our legal work is handled by Downey Brand, but multiple attorneys within Downey Brand that each bring different expertise as well.
I guess it kind of goes without saying that if we were to find someone who was strong in 5 out of 10 areas, we would have to rely on outside counsel from time to time.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things we'll touch on here is we have to be very clear about the fact that we're not going to eliminate our use of outside counsel. There's no one attorney that could do all the different things that we need to do. And even if there was that person out there, we don't have the resources and the tools that they would need to handle all that work. So it's not something that this is definitely not an either or. It's a question of whether we do both or stick with the existing model that we have. And our use of outside counsel fluctuates quite a bit. And it typically depends a lot on litigation or arbitration. Those things, you'll see spikes in our use of outside counsel over the years. There's other, contract negotiations is another thing that we've historically have seen an increase in the use of outside counsel, or large water rights projects. So it will fluctuate quite a bit, and it will continue to fluctuate quite a bit. And we're as efficient as possible, but it's not something that is decreasing or going away. So one of the other areas outside of general counsel work that a lot, I think in thinking about in-house counsel, it probably makes the most sense for us to focus on the area of water resources. So general public law and water resources and planning in those areas. So that budget typically fluctuates between 100 and 150,000. In the past, we've spent quite a bit of that budget on habitat conservation plan for the Calaveras River water rights extension filings, the groundwater sustainability plan, and our work with the Bureau on New Maloney's. Those are some of the big ticket items over the past several years. So we expect that level of spending to at least stay at that level, if not go up. We have another slide here.
Michael, is this the 100 and 150, is that related to mostly Dave Cameron's work?
A lot of that is Dave Cameron's work. Yeah, on all of those major items, I would say, are largely Dave. Yeah.
So Downey Brown was able to split off Matt Weber, his work. Does it all come in the same bill, or is it separated by
We
who's?
get several different bills from Downey Brand. It's all divided up into different matters.
And is it divided up into matters or divided up into which attorney from their firm is doing the work?
Both. So
Okay.
it'll have we have different matters, and then within each invoice, the individual attorney that's billing to that matter is listed.
And in the past couple of years, is there anyone else besides Matt Weber and Dave Cameron doing work for us?
Yeah, so Bob McCormick does some real estate work for us. Jenny
even heard
Lewis,
that name.
Jenny Lewis supports Matt on litigation. Melissa, Melissa, Thorne, thank you. She's helped us with some disputes that we had with the water board, regulatory issues. Trying to think off the top of my head, is that about it?
So there's at least 4 or 5, maybe 6 of them that have
Yeah.
specialties within their practice. Okay.
Right.
All right.
And Kevin O'Brien was previously very involved in our water rights issues, and so, we relied primarily on Dave for that, but he's still there in a, sort of a support capacity. And Dave's name will show up on multiple different invoices, because sometimes he's here for Matt in more of that general counsel
Right.
capacity.
No, I didn't realize Kevin was still doing work for us, so.
He hasn't billed anything to us for quite some time, but he's part of the CCWD institutional knowledge at Downey Brand.
Right.
So he
Especially
could-
related to water rights and FERC licensing.
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah, so he
All right.
could step in if we needed, and as you'll see in
So,
Our next
so
slides.
what
Yes.
you're saying, Michael, is while in fact we will have this in-house counsel, there are areas that we're going to require more of Downey Brand.
Absolutely. Yeah, whether it's
And-
Downey Brand or a different firm, we're still gonna need help in a lot of different areas. And then we would probably still use Liebert for employment and labor relations. We would probably still use Burke Williams or somebody like that for some of the financial transactions that we mentioned. So this is not, there's just no way that one in-house counsel could handle all of that work. And we'll get into the
Okay.
numbers of that in here in a little bit.
What is the Calaveras River Habitat Conservation Plan? Just quickly, if you can.
Sure, so that was a joint effort between Stockton East Water District and Calaveras County Water District that was several years in the works to address some threatened and endangered species in the Calaveras River. It ended up, well, it gets complicated pretty quickly, but it was a joint effort that in the end, Stockton East ended up completing independent of CCWD.
What was the benefit to CCWD for partnering with them and doing this project?
I'm gonna defer to Peter to.
Just-
Sure.
Can you do it just real quick? I'm just trying, I'm not familiar with the project.
So,
It's not a pretty picture.
yeah, so,
It was pretty much done before I started.
yeah, so around 2003, there was an issue where there was a lot of fish stranding on the lower reaches of the Calaveras River through Stockton East operations. There was a lawsuit filed by CalSPA, and as a result, they negotiated that they would pursue this habitat conservation plan, which is in lieu of basically what's called a Section 7 consultation with the federal government for the protection of the diversions that are in the stream. And so the idea is that it would cover the entire river, and they would have what's called take. So there's
So we did that in order to protect our water rights per se with diversion.
our diversions, yeah, so we have the,
That's kind of what I wanted to hear. Where was that benefit?
this would have protected the future growth and expansion of the Jenny Lind water treatment plant, the infiltration gallery, and also additional diversions through agricultural diversions that we use for our customers.
You said you would have, so it didn't work.
So,
It got petty. It got real petty at the end.
yeah, but just know that the existing diversions are covered. It's just, it was all predicated on future growth, so, yeah.
And that is a complicated story that isn't quite, it's not quite over yet. So we'll, at some point, we'll have to circle back on that, and pick up where it left off. We haven't had to do anything on that in the last year, other than we've been monitoring, as they have finalized the habitat conservation plan, we've been monitoring the progress of it, but we haven't been actively engaged in it.
We submitted a comment letter on the final plan.
If I could just say a couple of words to you, that there, in the beginning, there was an agreement that the CCWD and Stockton East would do it on a proportionality basis, but we have an infinitesimal amount of proportionality compared to their issues. at the end of it, they sent us a bill, was for $85,000 or something for our.
I believe it was almost $1 million. So
Oh.
there is an outstanding dispute there that
Right.
may be better suited for closed session.
I'm wrong up to
Yeah.
several decimal points, but.
Right.
But anyway, we didn't feel like that our portion should be anywhere near that amount. And nobody said anything that, oh, by the way, the meter's running, and so far you're up to this amount. They just sent the final billing, and it was shocking.
So the next slide looks at, the previous slide, we were talking about some of the historical uses of that water resources outside council budget, excuse me. Turning the page, this is sort of a, I don't know, not all-inclusive stab, but, you know, gives you a sense for some of the major, you know, the heavy lifting that we have in the next, you know, in the coming years. And these are some pretty substantial work efforts that we're already engaged in on most of these fronts. But a lot of that work, a lot of the bulk of the work is yet to be done on many of these areas.
So that bringing someone in, their level of expertise is going to be a critical issue.
It's one of the most challenging parts about this analysis
Right.
is at the end of the day, a lot of it depends on who that individual is. And so, you know, we can break the numbers down in multiple different ways, but we can't give you a definitive, yes, we're not gonna have to use outside counsel for this, that, and the other thing until we actually know who that person is and what their skills and experiences and what their background is. It's gonna vary from one person to the next.
What type of skills would you be asking the council to have?
Yeah, so I think that's why we kind of focused it. Oh, all right. We focused on the water resources work, because I think of the areas that we use outside counsel for, that's gonna be the single biggest work effort that isn't just you know, legal skills. It's not we're walking into a courtroom and we need well, hopefully not walking into a courtroom, but it's somebody that has, you know, water resources planning experience, but also hopefully a very good understanding of water rights, but can help us navigate all of those fairly complicated legal issues. Ideally, some FERC experience would also be high on our list, but that might be a difficult person to find. FERC is, you know, that's typically a pretty specialized area of law. So, you know, at a minimum, somebody with the water rights and the water resources experience that, so that when we do have to engage with FERC, if it's comment letters or if it's a negotiation, we have that, the water rights and the water resources background to draw from, even if it's not specific to FERC practice.
Regarding FERC, is that something Downey Brand would do? You think at this point in time, were you thinking Downey Brand would work with you on FERC or some other?
We're gonna have to take a look at that. When we get closer to the actual relicensing.
Licensing, right.
We're gonna have to take a careful look and make sure that we have the right people in place, and maybe Downey Brand has that, but as I said, if we're in a situation where we're actually competing for a license or leading the relicensing effort, we're gonna need quite a bit of help on that, and we're gonna need people that have a deep background dealing with FERC. And so we'd have to see if Downey Brand has that, or if we would need to bring somebody else in.
But it's kind of not an area you're thinking that the in-house would be able to do the FERC portion. They can do some support work with,
Yeah.
somebody
Well, that-
not spearhead.
Yeah.
I think they would
That'll-
support that effort, because in a big part of that process is the state water board's, their 401 certification, that is really taking a careful look on how the water resource is utilized in the operation of the hydropower project. So a huge part of that licensing effort deals with, water resources. And that person, hopefully, even if they don't have a background in dealing with FERC, they would be able to lead that part of the effort and then direct the FERC council if we needed
Yeah,
specific.
so the big thing is going to be dependent upon who you get.
It's really a huge part of it.
But regardless of who we get, still gonna need someone outside to do FERC, bond, and employee stuff.
I would think at a minimum those areas.
Okay.
Yeah. Looking at it, this is impossible to see on the screen, so we have the handouts. This is a breakdown. We went back through, with the help of Downey Brand, we went back through 10 years of all the different matters that we've had open with Downey Brand, and just looking at the annual billing data for each of those matters. And we picked out the ones that we felt like an in-house general counsel could have handled either wholly or in part. And so some of these, like the water resources project line, I think we went with about 50-50.
50%.
Right, so it's not 100% of that. We would probably still need some help from outside counsel in that area, but we felt like, and sorry about the formatting there, but we felt like a good chunk of it could be handled by in-house counsel. So, and I know the descriptions of the matters aren't all that specific, but these were the areas where we felt like we could do largely or fully in-house. And you can see at the bottom, the trend is increasing for the most part, but it will fluctuate quite a bit. And so we took the 10-year average of 132,000, and that number will come up later in the presentation as we're comparing costs. But that 10-year average, we wanted to be conservative when we were framing this in terms of where we think the potential savings might be. I think, seeing how the trend is for the last 5 years, the 132 figure is probably low, but we took the 10-year average for comparison purposes. Getting ahead of myself.
You just said the 132 is kind of low. Where'd you get that number? Where's the 132?
It's on the top of the table there.
It's the average of the 10-year total, so
Yeah.
if you look at the bottom, it's 1.32 million.
Oh, okay.
divided by 10.
Oh, 132, okay.
So that's the number we used in going forward, in evaluating what the potential savings for having in-house counsel might be, the offset of what we would otherwise use outside counsel for. And this might be a good time to talk about some of the, what I think are probably gaps in that number. It's very difficult to really go back and capture exactly what the savings would have been. One of the challenges, I think, is one of the things our historical legal expenses can't reveal to us necessarily is what we didn't get legal advice on that we probably should have. And so, we deal all the time with an agreement that we made with a specific landowner, 20 years ago that doesn't really make sense to us anymore, and we're still stuck with the implications or the repercussions of that deal. And it probably is something that an attorney should have looked at, but we either, because we felt like we could go it alone, or because we were trying to save cost, maybe didn't involve legal counsel. And so that's an area that is very difficult to quantify, but it's something that some of the sticky issues that we have that come up from time to time, we may have been able to avoid. And that's what is very, we can't really capture that in just going back and looking at past legal bills.
Because I can think of some situations, for example, down the Calaveras River, you have some small farmers who have, direct access to the river, and we came up with some kind of agreement because it seemed like it made sense at the time.
Yeah, so we have kind of one-off agreements that are here and there that pop up, somewhere down the road, and may not necessarily have been in our best interest.
Right,
but
right.
We, for one reason or another, probably didn't consult an attorney on that. So that's something that's hard to capture. So, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So on the second page, I think that's that one right there. So the HR labor, that was a different council that we used?
Yeah, that's primarily,
General
well,
counsel-
actually,
General counsel, this line is what we looked at on this spreadsheet.
that's correct, yeah. And sorry again about the formatting there. I thought we had fixed that. The HR labor item, actually going back, there was a period of time, I don't know when we started using labor, but there was a period of time when Downey Brand was handling that.
It's like, I think it was in 2013 is where, it was either 13 or 14 where we made the transition from Downey Grant to labor and custody.
So there was, but since then, it's been primarily Liebert handling employment and labor relations. We use the term technical counsel here, but that's just, outside counsel with specific expertise that we think we're probably still going to need some of that. So that's kind of the breakdown of the past major legal expenditures that we've had and how it breaks out. Are there any other questions on that stuff before I get to the next stage?
Looking back at this, the previous spreadsheet again, where it kind of spreads out the general counsel, are these particular projects that you listed here, the type of things that an in-house counsel would be doing?
Yeah, so these are the categories of all the different matters that we had open with Downey Brand over that 10-year period of time. This is probably half of them, no, less than half, I imagine. Some of them very small, one-off, items in a given year.
But you would expect if we had an in-counsel to be able to do these from water permit review to real estate matters?
We think we should be able to capture most of that in-house with an experienced water resources, in a general public agency background, an attorney with that kind of background.
So does this chart that's up on the board right now, it ends up with, 2.4 million? Is that total?
That's total.
Everything? And then the previous slide shows the things that we might have been able to do ourselves had we had that position on staff.
So this second line in here, general counsel, on the second table, that's just reflective of all of those items in the table before.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, again, there's a lot of different ways we can slice these numbers. Even picking the 10-year period was somewhat arbitrary. It seemed like a good snapshot. I wish Director Davidson was here because he has a recollection of significantly higher legal expenses maybe 20 years ago, but we felt like we wanted to just capture the last 10 years and use that for comparison purposes. Okay, so that's sort of the breakdown. That 132 number is going to come up here because, as I said at the beginning, we wanted to kind of use a couple of scenarios to break out, to really try to put this into something more tangible that we can discuss. And I should mention, well, I'll talk about it before we get to the second scenario. So the first one is, as the board knows, Robbie's retirement created a vacancy at the engineering analyst position. And we have been looking at that very carefully to decide how to replace Robbie, because that position was really kind of created specific to him and his background. And so we've been evaluating that since he left to see what the right replacement for him would be. And so it comes into play here because there was a fair amount of what Robbie did that was sort of right-of-way easement disputes, property transaction work, that we feel like that portion of what he was previously doing could probably be handled by in-house counsel. So in this scenario, what we did was, instead of replacing the engineering analyst position, which is a range 24 in our salary schedule, we would replace it with an engineering tech 2, lower level engineering position, and maybe even, if we could find the right person at an engineering tech 1 level, that would increase the savings here. This is an old version of the presentation, that's why it's not fixed.
Decreasing the range, would that, say, for example, the range 19 be able to handle or mitigate whatever circumstances came out? Because I remember some of the things that Robbie used to be involved in,
Yeah, so the thought was that we would be able to, that person would be able to capture the other things that we need from that position, as well as support for the GIS migration effort, so working closely with Sam on that.
So it's not replacing Robbie, it's taking it over here.
It's not replacing it like for like.
Right.
So we would replace that with a lower level position, basically, and take some of that work that he was doing and expect that to be handled by in-house counsel.
Is that engineering position union?
Yes.
And I would assume the general counsel will be represented.
Yes. Let's see, so we had updated this to show the range of what that savings would be based on the range of that salary position, but that's okay, we can use that will be factored in later.
5375 is the low.
That's right.
range of savings.
So it'd be between 53 and 70,000, I believe it was, yeah.
But as the employee who was put in that position, who stays here 10, 15 years or whatever, wouldn't that kind of eat up that difference at some point in time, that savings? I mean, you're looking at.
No, so that actually
$70,000
would be, that number represents the top of that salary range. The other number that's missing there is the 70,000 number, which would represent the bottom of that salary range. So if we brought somebody in an engineering tech 2 in at the bottom of that salary range on the first step, basically the savings would be 70,000.
Okay.
At the top of the range, it'd be 53,000.
Just so
yes.
that I understand that, under this heading, general counsel, new position, it talks about 155 to 190, and then you had a burden of, or a multiplier of 0.4, taking it to 217, 266. What, I just need to make sure that I understand that. Is it 53,375 with burden or prior to
Total comp.
total
Total
cost?
comp.
Okay.
And I'm glad, though, that you asked that question, Director Thomas. We did do some, I added the word informal here, because we would, if we go down this road, we would probably take a closer look at that. But just based on looking at some of the other agencies that are out there that use outside counsel, I mean, frankly, that range might be a little bit low. But we felt like, we could probably be competitive in that range, and especially we tend to have a slightly better benefits package, so that comes into play with the total comp. But based on our current benefits, the multiplier of 0.4 is appropriate.
How'd you arrive at the 0.4 number?
Sorry, what's that?
That's the average benefit
So it fluctuates from person to person depending on their unique situation. But when we look at all of our employees, the average is like 0.39 and change.
Did you use the union and the management? or
Total-
just within the management?
Yes, yeah.
Was there a reason, well, I guess it wouldn't really matter. so
I think the larger, I think looking at everybody is probably the better number, although that's why I say this is an informal effort here. We would need to take a closer look at
To be
it.
more accurate, it would
But I
be,
think it captures more of the unique situations that that cause that number to fluctuate, so.
And it's a guess, because the benefits are really individually specific to the actual person. If you could hire someone, they have, single, no children, they take the lowest, health benefits. You could also get someone who comes in who's got full-fledged, family health. So it really just depends on what that individual is. So that's why the benefits in general really are a big wide range.
Right. It's difficult to be precise with any of this, frankly, but we're breaking it down the best that we can. Let's see, so assuming average savings, are we on the right slide here? That's where that 132 figure comes back into play. If we assume an average savings from the use of outside counsel of 132,000, and then the range of savings for the engineering position would be 53,000 to 70,000. But at the low end of that range, it came out to 185. So the range was 185 to 210 or something like that. Toward the cost of in-house counsel. So looking at the slide before that, I remember we said we're probably in the range of 217 to 266,000 total compensation for that position. So this option gets us, pretty close, but not, just based on that, that breakdown, it doesn't quite get us there. But again, there's a lot of assumptions that are built into that. There's a lot of questions that, could cut either way. It's going to fluctuate from year to year. That's why I'd raised the issue, though, of what are some legal issues that we maybe should have had somebody taking a look at that we didn't. So what's the real value of that person is actually very difficult to calculate. The number I mentioned earlier that Rebecca brought up to me was, probably our average billing rate for Downey Brand is around $400 an hour, and if you took a full-time employee at that rate, you're over 800,000, 850,000, I think it was. So you guys might want to ask for a raise from your agencies.
But I think what it shows is we're paying, basically an average of $132,000 a year. If you divide that by $400 per hour, we're getting a fraction of FTE versus what we could do in-house.
Right. So that is an interesting way to look at it. Getting 2,080 hours for 250,000 is actually a pretty good deal.
it's a pretty good deal if you need it.
If you need it, that's
Yeah.
right, that's right.
I mean, if you're paying for it and you don't need it, and they're doing something else,
And that's,
that should be, it's not a $400 an hour job, then you got a problem.
that's absolutely right, and that's why I think this varies from one agency to the next. Because the answer to that question is really, it really changes the calculation.
And this is a position that would pretty much stay with CCWD, is it?
You couldn't get rid of them.
Thank you, that's what I'm trying to get rid of. How easy is it to stop that position? You know what I mean? It's like, so even in your contributing to pension, you continue to pay that forever and ever.
Actually-
With a Downey
Well,
brand, you pay $400, you get your bill and it's done.
That's right. Although I think when I answered the question earlier that the general counsel would be management confidential, I don't actually think they would be a part of that bargaining unit. You guys might know, but they're probably at will.
I would
yeah.
think so, right.
So I think that,
Right.
like, they would be more like the general managers, so it's an at-will contract just
What would
between the.
stop them for saying we're going to be part of this management bargaining unit?
So the general counsel position, like it is now, it would remain, and it's very important for that position to be independent and answer directly to the board. So
So
this
be the
person.
board's employee like you are?
Exactly. So this person would, inevitably become an important part of the management team. But the general counsel, the role, the really fundamental role of the general counsel is to advise the board, and to keep the rest of us out of trouble. So that's absolutely critical, and it would be just imperative to maintain that independence and have that direct line of communication between the board and the general counsel.
Yeah,
So would-
and there would be a complete evaluation or a continuous evaluation. You couldn't just say,
Well, if he was an employee, we don't get that option as a board. If he's the
Or
board's
she.
employee, we would have that. No, we really don't.
No, I said or she. No, you're right.
Yeah.
Well,
So if it's our
yeah.
employee, then yes, we would have a little bit more say-so on things, and I like that idea better,
Mhm.
just because we could say, okay, we're done.
Mhm.
Adding another employee, I think takes a lot more thought process,
Yeah.
on the union, right?
What would the employee tree look like? Is it any different than where our attorney sits right now?
It's a good question, and I've looked at a couple of different examples. I've seen a few that have, they all have a line directly to the board, and some only have the line directly to the board. I've seen a few that have a line that goes directly to the board and another one that goes to the general manager.
And that bill be based on the wording in the contract?
Or it would be based on the board's, what we think is the best arrangement.
So,
Honestly, from my perspective, I think either way, we're going to, as management staff, we're going to work closely with this person. But the board would also have the knowledge of that person also works directly for you.
I can
And
see it.
that becomes critical. That becomes critical when we have a situation with our general manager.
Right.
And
We have to
we've
keep
gone
it
through
separate.
that in a not too recent past where it did make a huge difference.
And it's just a matter of time. By the way, I have something that, no.
And you guys work together, all for co-management, if you will, but not only for legal for the other guy.
Right.
But,
No, the independent role of general counsel is absolutely critical. And it's one, actually, I asked Stacy to take a look back at whether or not CCWD has ever used in-house counsel before. And the only example we're aware of was when it was general manager and general counsel in one person.
remember those days?
Some of you might remember that, and it's not a structure I would ever recommend. In fact,
what was it?
it was one person who was both. I wasn't around.
Yeah. That guy from Nevada.
So when I first started at Utica as the interim general manager, because it was an interim general manager position, I kept the general counsel role, and until the board decided and that we would keep me in the general manager role. At that point, immediately, I would never recommend an agency have one person in both of those roles.
Right.
So at that point, the Utica board appointed a separate independent general counsel. So that's what this person would be. And I'm glad that came up, because that's something we should be very clear about. Okay, so working, just making sure we understand this scenario. A lot of assumptions, like we said, built into those numbers, but it comes close, but at least based on these numbers, we'd be a little bit short, depending on who the person is and where they came in at their range. Maybe if we hired right at the bottom of that range, we could probably make it work, because I think it was 210.
That's probably the last thing we want to do. I mean, to get someone who's inexperienced in water and inexperienced in, everything that comes along with the water district. And if you get someone with a lot of experience, it's going to be,
Somebody right out of law school, I'm sure they'd tell you they could do it.
yeah, they know everything, of course.
And also, the board would be the one interviewing and deciding who gets hired, correct?
Yeah, ultimately, I mean, I haven't, that is the way that it went in the general counsel positions that I've held in the past, and I would expect that to be the case here. So let's skip to a second option. So our soon-to-be dearly departed Peter, there he is, he's still here.
Can I ask a quick
Yes.
question of one of these two?
Sure.
The council, do you guys have any kind of a job description or any of this? You do have a job description. Could you share that with us?
Yes. I have Brian's, and we can, I'll make sure we get that. In fact, we'll get theirs, and then if we go down this path, we would reach out more broadly and see how that shakes out across different agencies. But yes, good question. Okay, so this second option came about when we received the sad news that Peter would be leaving, and it kind of created another potential area for us to get creative in. So basically the scenario here is, instead of replacing, it's kind of similar to what we did with Robbie's position. Instead of replacing Peter with a like position, a water resources manager, we would replace him with something along the lines of a water resources technician. That's the term we used here, but it may be something else.
So when you guys were thinking of this, do you have anybody in mind currently employed that would step up? Or whether it's a step up or not, I don't know.
So that gets kind of back to what I was saying at the very beginning of, these are purely hypothetical scenarios. And there's other ways that we could potentially do this. These are thought exercises, not at all specific to any individual. But the idea here is that person would hopefully have the skills and experience needed to step in and do some of the work that Peter does, but they probably would not handle some of the more technical stuff or some of the more complicated strategic planning or long-term resource planning efforts.
Who would that be on if we don't have that position anymore?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've talked about that a fair amount, and it's still an open question. I could see that person actually answering to the general counsel and working closely with them on the water resources planning efforts. A lot of that work, if it's annual reporting or reports that we have to prepare periodically, like an urban water management plan that we'll be doing next year, those kinds of things will get legal review anyways. So having that person work on those projects and then working with the general counsel on those efforts.
Are we developing any of our staff, to fill these positions? I mean, have we even considered it?
No,
No.
because, and I don't mean to say, no, we're not considering anybody, or that we wouldn't try to develop in-house. We would consider that. But I don't want to confuse this with any individual that we would.
Okay,
Yeah.
what we want to do is create the position in.
Yeah,
And go from
if we
there.
can
Right.
work with somebody in-house and there's interest and a qualified person exists here, absolutely, we would want to promote from within.
An exercise for you all, doing we were just talking the water resource technician, what that would be, what general counsel would be, what the new engineering person would be, to make sure all the needs are met. And we don't want to have that attorney be doing stuff that, water resources should do.
Right.
Attorney way kind of thing, and just see if we can do it in this scenario when you looked at that job description.
Yeah, so that would be the next step here, is if we think this is the option we want to pursue, yeah, we would develop job descriptions, make sure that the appropriate person is assigned to the appropriate task, and that it's the, you know, the best use of those positions. But we haven't, so far, we haven't gotten to that level yet here. These are just some, like I said, hypothetical scenarios to consider.
Haven't you started the recruitment process for
Yes, and I'm glad that you mentioned that.
for what? For Peter's position?
Yes, so we thought about that. As I said, this discussion was underway before Peter announced he was leaving. And then even in considering this option, we felt like this conversation was still so new that we didn't want to wait on going out for Peter's position, because that might, honestly, that might change what we decide to do here. And I have it on good information that we will have some highly qualified, at least one highly qualified candidate. So that's
For
an
the water
interesting-
resource position?
Yeah.
For Peter's position?
Yeah, so that might change what we decide to do here. And so we didn't want, we felt like it wasn't, you know, we hadn't even talked to the board about this yet. We were still pretty early in development of this idea. And there's a lot of important work that Peter's been working on. And we're already, you know, it's gonna be a challenge to make sure all that stuff keeps moving forward in the interim. So we felt like that position is important enough that we need to just get that out and see what our options are, not delay because of this discussion.
Because what you're saying is going to affect staffing option number 2, an experienced water resources manager comes at a higher cost.
Right, that's right. So the range here that is shown is total comp. So I think we figured the cost of this position would be in the $60,000 to $80,000 range, but that's the total comp number. And then you see the savings from Peter's position to what this new position would be. There's between 70 and 92,000.
Yeah, that middle bullet point there, no, on the next one. Yeah, that just seems like, Peter, would an attorney coming in here without any water resource manager, you know, experience, be able to do much of your job? I mean, without training. I mean, I know once you're in the house, in the building for a couple of years, probably so, if they've been working side by side with you, but coming in, what would that learning curve look like from a legal expert who deals with, and I know, and I don't know how long, I know Brian's been in that position and working with Tom Cumpson a long time before, and a lot of other very intelligent people at EID probably would be able to do a lot of water resource manager stuff or take over that position. But someone coming in that hasn't worked at a water district, what would that look like to be able to do the second bullet point there?
Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, even for me, there was a huge learning curve. I would say, you know, a year to 2 years before I really felt comfortable even talking about all the water right permits and things that we have at the district. But yeah, I think that there would be some items that could potentially be, you know, when it comes to some engagement of folks outside of this organization, where you might have an opportunity for strategic planning and things like that alongside the general manager, where that person would be able to handle that more efficiently than someone that was strictly focused on numbers and sort of those things, the technical aspects of it. So there's some opportunities there that, you know, there's a lot of hours and time spent preparing for meetings and things like that that people aren't necessarily aware of, working with other agencies in the region, things like that, so.
You have a job description, right?
Yes.
And that, it'd be helpful looking at some of these job descriptions if we're trying to make a decision.
And then there's times where things like, you negotiating water contracts. For instance, we've done a couple in the last couple of years in the Calaveras River.
Yeah. How do you?
I can look at a contract and build the essential components of something that I want to see, but in the end, all of it gets handed off to Dave Cameron for that kind of thing. So there's a lot of things like that. If we were to start to look at agreements for selling or wheeling of water to other agencies on the Highway 4 corridor, for instance, which we've had those discussions, you're still going to want your legal counsel to look at that no matter what. So there's opportunities there for things like that too. So
Maybe looking at it instead of a water resources technician, well, I guess you'd have to have tech on there, but not be a manager. That would save a little bit, but still require, some expertise there.
We don't have a water resources technician right now, do we?
No,
Yeah.
so that would be a new position, and maybe that's the right name for it, maybe not. The other option that we actually considered but didn't include here was just sort of a high-level admin for support for the general counsel, who could probably handle or be trained to handle a lot of the reporting requirements, the coordination of independent, because we're still going to have to use, as we do with Peter, we're still going to have to use a lot of consultants to help with the preparation of those documents and reports. And so there's, as I said at the beginning, there's a lot of different ways that this could, that we could do this. These are just two.
You've indicated that you have maybe you might have a good candidate coming in applying for Peter's job, the water resource manager. Do you have any ideas of who might, if this job was created and posted, of someone who might be good for this position?
For the general counsel?
General counsel at CCWD
No.
in 2020.
I didn't want to really make it that widely known that we were looking at it, because people are just going to be banging down the doors. We're not going to be able to keep them out of here.
Right.
But I don't have.
Is that why you guys are here?
This is actually an interview. They didn't know that.
Have you been interviewed already?
Michael?
Yes.
What you just said, why would they be banging down our door to come work here?
Oh, no, I was.
He was being facetious.
I apologize for
No,
my
I think
sarcasm.
he does have some merit for saying that.
Well,
No.
this is-
I actually think it's going to be a challenge for us to find qualified applicants. That's one of the challenges here. I was being completely
With the
sarcastic.
pension and,
I'm sorry, what's that?
the attorney would be a pension employee?
From my perspective, and obviously I've made that choice already to relocate to the foothills and give up the law firm life, and so for me, this would be a golden opportunity that I was looking for if I was sitting in an office in Sacramento. I don't think they'll be banging down the doors though.
This position that we're considering is a pension position though, correct?
Yes.
Not just medical?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there are a lot of things about it, and Brian and Ellen can touch on this too. Not having to deal with billable hours, not having to deal with law firm pressure. There's a lot of things about going in-house that are very attractive to attorneys. In fact, when I first talked to Matt about this, he had it was the end of the day, and he had a really long and painful deposition, and so we were joking about him being
His
ready
coming
to
on.
walk away.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
though? Attorneys that work for a firm, are they like 1099, or they actually have a payroll with taxes and all the deductibles?
For the most part, it depends on the arrangement, depends on the firm, but for the most part, they're employees of that law firm, yeah.
And if they become a partner, is that when it would change or not?
Still employee, I don't know, I didn't get there, so.
The question for,
I mean, I suppose I did at Park Minkler before I was fired from there, but it'll vary from firm to firm. I think when they get to the partner stage, they're part owners of the firm.
Right, so
in a
maybe
sense,
that would
so.
change to a different kind of status.
But I think for the most part, for all intents and purposes, treated as employees.
I got a question for Ellen and Brian. The, under staffing option one, there was a slide that showed with the multiplier that the total compensation package would be 217 to 266. Is that competitive with where you're at right now?
Oh, we're getting straight to negotiation here. I like this.
Kind of get to the nuts and bolts. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds right, Director Hyman. That when I looked at
To
it,
the high or to the low?
the one multiplier seemed close, the pay range seemed
Okay, all right, thanks.
I think we're in the ballpark. There's other, like I said, there's other agencies that pay a lot more, and it'll depend on the individual too. You know, we looked at SSJID that does use in-house counsel, and they had an in-house counsel that recently retired, and so when he was at the end of his career, and he'd been there for a long time, it was, I think the salary was probably more along the lines of, you know, 250 to 300. Just salary, not total comp. And then the replacement is somewhere around 180 or 190. So it'll fluctuate depending on the individual.
Depending on, yeah, what,
So let's see, where did we leave off here? So this scenario gets us a little bit closer to where we would have to be. But we touched on the trade-off of that general counsel having to handle probably more of the water resources work that we otherwise wouldn't expect an attorney to be working on. And so, you know, from my perspective, if we were to go down either, or to consider either of these options, I think we would want to maximize the benefit that we're getting from those people. And I think even if it cost a little bit more, the way that we would realize the full, you know, the advantages that we're after here would be to have, you know, pretty high level experienced people in both of those roles. After working through this, that was sort of the sense that I had. But
Well, both of the roles being water resource manager and general counsel?
right,
Okay.
so the option one basically.
Right.
Even though it would cost us a little bit more to have you know, somebody like Peter with his experience, or somebody along those lines working closely with an experienced attorney on those efforts that we talked about earlier. To me, that's where we really get the full value of what we would be trying to do here. But there's trade-offs, obviously, that's gonna cost more, so.
I have one more question for the
Well,
general-
you'll have an opportunity.
general- Okay.
I'm not trying to cut you off, but you will have more opportunities.
I'm going to
to
forget
talk
my
about it.
question, though. I know.
Write it down.
Under option one, we don't need to have the savings from option two, right? It sounds like we were covered with the technician, the engineering being less, and then not having outside counsel.
It would be
Right?
close.
So it's still okay,
It would be close.
It would be close, but it doesn't.
a little higher or no?
It would cost us, so we wouldn't have the savings from the other position.
We wouldn't have the savings
So
from the
the-
water resource.
Right.
But we would have the savings from the
The
engineering.
engineering side of it and.
Which wouldn't
outside
cover it.
counsel.
But
Which
what
wouldn't quite
we
cover it.
calculated
It
in
wouldn't quite
that,
cover it?
it
No.
wouldn't quite cover it. Based on this analysis, which again is all sorts of assumptions and variables in it. But I think it came out to, in the best case scenario, we would be saving about $210,000 a year, and that would be the very bottom of the range that the general counsel position would be at. So there would be a gap there in that scenario. But again, it might cost more. The flip side of that is the value that we would be getting for it. And I think in the end, I think it would probably be worth the additional expense because of the return on that cost.
Is there anything that CCWD is working on right now that could have benefited from an in-house counsel? Can you give an example?
The
Probably
slurry
every
line.
day.
No,
There's probably
I want
stuff
some
every day.
examples, not just every
Yeah.
day.
The slurry line is an example that comes to mind.
But you're not doing that real good?
We are
Were
working
you
on
winging
it.
it?
We are winging
What
it.
is that, Michael?
If you ask Dave Cameron, he might tell you I'm winging it.
Like the easement stuff and whatnot?
There are a lot, well, the easement
wing and a
issues, we
prayer.
actually did do a lot of that in-house, but we had to have outside counsel for that as well. But there are actually, for how small that line is, there are a lot of complicated legal issues that come into play. And that is why we're in, you know, the third decade of trying to bring that line into use, and why there is still unmet demand for water property owners that live on that line to this day. And we have not been able to figure it out, get it over that finish line of utilizing, the water that we have. And we have unmet demand for that water, and we have the infrastructure, we have a piece of infrastructure in place, and we haven't been able to sell water out of that line.
So past boards said, it's too complicated.
It's all the board's fault. No.
Yeah, it's too complicated.
I think it's one of those issues that it goes in fits and starts. The time that Peter and I have had available to work on that in the last several months is nowhere near enough to really get it to where it needs to be.
Slurry line, 40 hours a week work.
But think of the benefits
Well,
we're gonna
it could be
get.
for a short period of time,
Yeah,
and then we
yeah.
have it, and then we get there.
We've got policy review. I would say once every 3 days, a staff person comes to me and brings this, it's either an existing agreement that an individual employee made with a property owner, or it's an email of a potential agreement that's occurring.
So
Neither
that's
one
almost
went
a daily thing.
daily. Neither one went to any council. So the ones that have been agreed to, I'm looking at like, how am I supposed to deal with this? Because this doesn't follow any of our policies. It didn't go to the board. It's out, I don't know how we can defend it, but we agreed to it. So I'm not really sure, we're kind of stuck in those scenarios.
So sending it to them and say, what can we do and everything
Right.
would be something. Okay.
Yeah,
Or keeping us out of that situation to begin with. But policy review
Policy
is another
review,
one. We have a
bring
lot of,
forward a policy, and, part of general counsel's job is to kind of, look forward at what they're going to be able to defend. So if we're pushing forward a policy that they go, that's probably not something that we can defend easily, then we probably need to not push that policy forward, probably need to reword it or look at a different avenue. And right now, we're just trying to get things that make sense to us, but I'm not an attorney, so most of the staff on the phone call are not attorneys.
So right now you don't.
Wait, he is an attorney.
not for very much longer.
So you don't send stuff like that you question to Matt?
Well, we do, actually.
do.
It depends.
It depends, but I would say, I think what
So you
has.
could be an attorney. It depends.
I had an attorney that told me I should be an attorney. It depends, and I think the other thing is, everyone's trying to be really cognizant of cost. And so I think there's judgment calls that get made that are like, this makes good enough sense to me. An attorney probably would have looked at it differently and said, this is probably not the best agreement to enter. So we're constantly having situations like that, which it would be really nice to have, an in-house eye that has the district, it has vesting in the district in our best interest, right?
Yep.
And in
And-
your best interest.
And the policy handbook is a good example of an area where we know, have known for a long time that there's a lot in there that needs to be updated. And again, it comes down to bandwidth, both in terms of staff time and what what we can afford to use our outside legal counsel for. And so it ends up getting pushed down the road year after year. I mean, for the rest of the management team, are there other examples that you can think of where this might have come in handy? Was that the question from the
Yeah, just
board?
give us
Yeah.
examples of where we could be using them today.
No, I can see that, I can see it happening daily. I mean,
How about-
getting an email or,
Our contracts, yeah.
Contracts with contracts,
Yeah.
with construction.
They always want to negotiate the terms.
How about La Contenta? Would that be above the level of responsibility that the in-house counsel would be expected?
Which aspect of?
The trial, yeah, the trial.
No, I would not expect in-house counsel to handle the trial.
Oh, yeah.
Even if they have that kind of background, they would need the resources that a law firm has to take us through trial.
Okay, well, Michael,
Yeah, it would consume their time for periods of the, you know, depending on where we're at in the litigation, but discovery, and trial prep and the trial itself, we wouldn't have a general counsel because they'd be spending, you know, all of their time on that.
I just, as you know, I just finished my third year on the board, and in my first year on the board, that we had an expert, somebody from a nearby irrigation district that, similar to ours, that were in the final throes of negotiating a FERC contract. And I remember thinking that, oh, this is really important. They've spent, what was it, $13 million, and they weren't through yet, and oh my God, this could be really, really expensive, and we ought to be setting aside a war chest for that. I don't think that we've done anything meaningful toward that FERC relicensing, and I see
Oh,
that.
yeah, that's,
I see that this in-house counsel could earn his pay just doing that. To my,
I think that's probably right. Again, it gets back to the experience that person has, but at least being able to move the ball forward on, because that's another issue that we have spent a lot of time talking about and working on, but not, you know, with the time that we have available, and which is often never enough.
See, that's one of the things, that's one of the topics that I think would most likely, we would require outside counsel with extreme level of water rights, which is where Dave Cameron comes in, and I don't know how many years that guy has, but there's even things to this day, or within a few years, that he's referring to Kevin O'Brien of his office, because it's so complicated.
I like that term, extreme water rights experience. We're going to use that in the job description.
Well, I think
I think there's multiple aspects, though, of that one is just strictly the FERC relicensing process, where that's a specialized area where we're probably going to need some help. But probably for us, the bigger issue is the contract and our relationship with NCPA. And that is something that we are internally probably going to spend a lot of time discussing and trying to figure out, you know, what the best outcome is there. So that's something I would expect.
Would we be relying on outside counsel for that, or do you think that,
That's something I would
regardless of the level of experience of the person that we bring in, that we would rely on general counsel?
Anybody that we decide to hire for this position, I would expect a lot of help on that issue with. Because it's not strictly that's one of those, that's a negotiation as much as it is anything else. And there's a lot of complicated issues in contract interpretation, and you know, there's a lot of complicated issues that come into play, but that's the kind of thing that I would expect a lot of help from an in-house counsel. Not that they would be able to handle 100%
all of
of
it,
that.
but just,
But coordinate that effort, help us coordinate that effort.
And everything that I've heard about our current contract on that FERC license with NCPA, everything I've heard about it is it's very, very poorly written, not in,
depends on who.
I think NCPA thinks it's well written.
I think
but-
they probably do, and they probably might even think it's fair, but it probably isn't. And I don't know, you know, that's what makes me nervous, is that how important that is and how much might have been lost. I mean, could be, we're talking about millions.
It's really a huge issue for us, yeah.
not could have been lost, was lost.
I mean, no, I'm talking about future.
Oh, okay.
And I think that the presentation you're referring to is when Andy Fecco came down and talked to the board, and he is now general manager at Placer County Water Agency, and Placer County Water
Is that what you're
Agency
talking
does utilize in-house counsel. To a limited degree, though, even more limited than what we're talking about here. And yeah, so again, it's not there's no one-size-fits-all approach to this, because the policy issues, you know, state legislative issues, regulatory proceedings that are underway that are going to impact us. These are things that we try to keep a handle on, we try to be engaged in, especially when it's really going to have a direct effect on the district. But that's something I would also expect this person to be able to help us with.
Joel, are you attending law school? Not yet?
Don't do it.
When I asked about whether the in-house counsel could have taken on the trial for La Contenta, you said very loudly no. But since we're hoping for a reimbursement of legal expenses on, if it goes right, the judgment goes right, is there any way to recover our in-house legal expenses that would be consumed in assisting Downey Brand on something like that?
Ooh, good question that I will hope to get some help from those two on, but it depends, I think. But you would definitely want to track that time and make sure you're billing to that effort. I would think so. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good.
You know, if we had this person here, it would be kind of nice for them to track their time to see what types of project they're working on more versus the other for the first couple of years.
Mhm.
Just to get
Well, that would be part of their, accountability, yeah.
So if it's
Absolutely.
okay with the board, a lot of these questions are questions I'd really like for you to hear from Brian and Ellen on. And so I can wrap up here pretty quickly. The downside of a handout is that the timing of my concluding joke doesn't really make sense anymore because clearly, this is one of my last opportunities to give the standard lawyer answer until I give up my bar license. But clearly the answer is, it depends. It depends on all these different variables that we've discussed. I think the financial picture is pretty close. And so I think it really comes down to our assessment of whether we think it's a good fit for the district and whether we think, we're willing to accept that potential variability. It has a internal cultural impact. And it would change how we operate as a management team. And so I don't want to ignore that aspect of it either. And there may be pros and cons to that aspect of it as well. And then again, as we've already said, it really depends on, in a lot of ways, on who the individual is and what the skills and experience that they bring. So with that, we didn't discuss who wants to go first. Ellen is closer. Oh, no, it's going to be Brian. So,
Brian seems to be quicker, though.
I will be happy to answer more of the board's questions. Again, we're just extremely grateful to Brian and Ellen for making the trip up here to participate in this discussion with us. But yeah.
I'm only going first because I don't want to have to follow Ellen Ware. I mean, she's the smartest person I know. So, thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. This is my first time at CCWD, so really fun for me to come down here.
How did that happen?
I know.
Yes.
You don't get out often.
So, yeah, well, it's because they got me holed up doing all this work. But my name is Brian Polson, for the record. I'm General Counsel at El Dorado Irrigation District. I've worked at EID since 2011. I was hired there initially as Deputy General Counsel. I worked for Tom Cumston for a number of years. And then I succeeded Tom when he retired to the General Counsel position in 2017. So January of 2017, so I guess 3 years ago. When I first took that job, shortly after taking it, I thought to myself, am I ever going to be able to do this job? And I seriously wondered. 3 years into it now, the question has shifted a little bit. It's, can anyone do this job? Because it is complicated. As Michael went through his presentation, I don't know, one of the first few slides where he lists the role of outside legal counsel, and then he kind of lists all these general areas: general public agency law, water rights, FERC, environmental matters, employment law, litigation, mediation, public contracting, bonds and other complex financial transactions. And I thought, oh my God, I've done every single one of these in the last 24 hours. Literally everything on here. I mean, and, some of them were, a 5-minute conversation with one of our directors. But I don't know. So Michael asked me to just be here and to talk about or answer questions about the pros and cons. I didn't really have anything prepared to say. I've never been that great at kind of talking about how awesome I am. Sometimes I wonder why I'm even still employed. But so I don't have any prepared remarks in terms of what the benefits are, but I'm certainly happy to answer your questions. A number of questions, came up during the course of that I have thoughts on.
I have questions now. Can you tell me a little bit about EID and how many customers you have? I think you're water only, right? And in domestic or?
Yeah, so,
Give me a little
yeah, I'm glad you asked. A little bit of context about EID. So EID is an irrigation district. It was formed in 1925. We are primarily, we're the western slope of El Dorado County. Not the entire county, but a pretty big chunk of it. We're the largest water purveyor in El Dorado County. We purvey water both for ag and domestic purposes. We operate wastewater treatment plants, much like CCWD. We do recycled water for about 4,000 customers, mostly residential backyard customers. We also operate a FERC licensed hydro project, in which we wholesale power to PG&E, so similar, it sounds like, to what you guys do with NCPA. And then we operate a recreational enterprise as part of our water facilities. So we have about
What's the number of customers that you have altogether?
we serve about 120,000 customers.
What's your annual budget? I think that'll tell us a little.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so annual operating, I'm not the finance person, so I'm going to kind of wing it here, but I think our last 2018 CAFR indicated that our annual operating expenses were about $50 million. That's my recollection. I'm off the top of my head. That's a little bit, we have about 230 employees, so a little, I understand that that's different than CCWD. Let me tell you a little bit about the Office of General Counsel. So EID brought they went, they had this discussion, presumably at about the time that they brought in my predecessor, Tom Cumpston, as their first in-house general counsel. That happened in about 2002. Tom had previously been working at the El Dorado County Counsel's office, so he made a transition to EID. He hired a deputy general counsel, whose name was David Egerton, in 2004. And so the Office of General Counsel expanded to 2 lawyers and 1 paralegal at that time. It has remained at that size, although I now have other employees, EID employees that report directly to me as part of the Office of General Counsel. So in order to staff other legally related but not necessarily legal functions at the job. So for example, public contracting, I have an administrative analyst that works with our engineering department on the public contracting, though she works in my office and reports directly to me. We have a risk analyst, someone who handles all of our claims made against the district and the district's insurance. She reports to me. And then, we have a couple of administrative staff and someone who deals in records management. She administers our records retention program. So that's a little bit about the Office of General Counsel. But my role and my primary function is to advise the board, the general manager, and to a lesser extent, the department directors on legal matters, transactional or otherwise. I'm the district's representative in court proceedings, though, as Michael indicated, we are not equipped to handle large litigation in-house all the time. So I often, if it's going to be a complex litigation matter, hire outside counsel to supplement our own resources. Though I continue to stay involved in all of our litigation matters. One example is that I spent a good chunk of this week drafting a brief or working on a draft brief with my deputy general counsel in a CEQA litigation matter that we have right now. Now, we have hired outside counsel to kind of be a strategic advisor on us and to help us in the actual court proceedings, but we try and offset some of those costs by working on those matters in-house as well. So it's, as Michael indicated, it's, you're probably never going to find one person to do everything for you. You'll always have to rely on outside counsel here and there, but that's the approach that we've taken.
Do you know what your budget is for your department? Not all of legal, but your deputy or administrative staff? What your budget is?
I don't know what the budget is for. I can tell you, if you're interested to know, generally salary and benefits on.
No, I was thinking, well,
All right.
I don't need to know particular ones. I'm just wondering, is it, $2 million a year or whatever?
Yeah. Actually, that it's the Office General Counsel budget is about $2.5 million a year. 2020 is about it's about 2.5.
And how many employees are
There's 7, including myself.
7,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So yeah. Hopefully that answers.
Well, my question I had earlier, and I'll ask Ellen when she appears up at the podium, do you, and it may not even be relevant because of the size of your department and the have you always been, when you first got hired in 2011, and you had 2 attorneys on staff. And by the way, I've been very impressed with your presentations and Tom Cumston's presentations over the years, and I've seen both of you very impressive programs at Aqua and other places as well at forums for mountain counties. But
I'm glad
I was just
I
always
got one person fooled.
I was just always impressed with what seemed to be 2 well-versed, very capable attorneys and well-rounded subject matter. But it's always seemed like the A team. I mean, you got 2 of them, and both you guys are at EID. I thought, how in the hell can you afford something like that? And I don't know. Did you have 7 employees back then? I mean,
When I came, when I came to EID, the Office of General Counsel was Tom, and then myself. I was replacing Dave Egerton after Dave went on to El Dorado County Water Agency, and a paralegal. So at that point in time, the other employees that I talked about, risk analyst, contracts, those were all already staffed, but they were dispersed throughout the agency. So over time, as we do, and Michael just gave you a bunch of different examples of how, you kind of, if someone leaves and you think, oh, is this the best way for us to do it? And so over time, the Office of General Counsel kind of absorbed some of those other functional areas. We've never added any staff. Those people were already at the district. But
so my question was, do you find yourself doing tasks that are unrelated to legal work?
sometimes I do have to make my own copies. Yeah. No,
And coffee?
I'm kidding. I know. It's not the law firm lifestyle anymore, I'm telling you. Yes, sure, yeah. I occasionally answer questions that, did it have to come to me? Could it have gone to that person's direct supervisor? Yeah, maybe, but Michael touched on, and I don't know that I have a lot to really elaborate on, but it's an important point, and that is that there are intangible benefits of having a legal advisor available in the office all the time. And, maybe that's just what I tell myself to make myself feel like I'm adding value. I don't know. I actually said to Michael, I said, what do you want me for? You should ask Jim. He can tell you whether I'm adding value or not. I don't know. Probably not. But I can tell you that I get, I try and maintain an open door policy as much as I can so that our staff knows that I'm there for them. I'm available as a resource. I view that as a really important aspect of my job, and it's a revolving door. I have people in and out of there all day long. I submit an annual report to my board of directors that kind of breaks down how I allocate time. I think you guys talked about accountability, and that's one thing that I believe strongly in. So, I report to the board on here's how I've allocated my time, and sometimes I look at how much time I spend in meetings. Especially, just internal staff meetings, and it's a lot of time. So, I don't know if that answers your question, Director Adaman, about is that really legal? It may not be writing briefs or standing up in court, but I think it does add some intangible value to the operations of the district.
Yeah, you chatted about improving the culture, and that's what I can see. That's a real value to us because, while we in fact are very close to our outside counsel, changing it to a CCW, someone who has a desk here, just makes that person so much more a part of the culture.
Sure. Yeah.
And that would be just extremely important, I think.
Yeah, like I said, I hope that, I add value. I think Jim Abercrombie, our general manager, would tell you that having that legal presence does add value to the internal culture of the district. One question that was raised about, well, who does a person work for and what does the tree look like? I am hired, I'm an at-will employee, hired directly by, and I report to the board. So my contract is with the board of directors, much like the general managers. The general manager and I have a very close relationship. We're geographically located in the same area of the building, and so he's in my office all the time, and I'm in his office all the time. But both of us understand, that that our lines go to the top, not necessarily to one another, and so I do maintain a strict independence from the EID staff, even though a number of them report directly to me because I work for the board.
Another question I had was, you talked about power. Do you have a big lake or,
Yes.
generate? What is that?
We operate a FERC licensed hydropower project, which has 4 large reservoirs that feed into an off-stream diversion where we take water and then put it through an off-stream hydropower plant. Generates about 22 megawatt power is the capacity of that. We have some smaller, like in conduit type hydro facilities, but that's our, to us it's large. I realize it's not large in the, our SMUD is our neighbor, so, our power plants are across the river from one another, and so, we are fairly small.
Sounds
but,
big to me.
yeah, we do have reservoirs. We have, I don't know how many DSOD regulated reservoirs, but a number.
And it's associated recreation component too?
There is, yeah. And we operate and we do have a small recreation division. I'm not sure how many employees. It's not that many, but.
It caught my ear when you were saying the way we're staffed and you have paralegals. That's one thing that Michael's summary didn't touch on, but wouldn't we realistically have to devote somebody in the building to type up these things and make copies and stuff? I know you said it.
So Michael indicated, I think, in one of his options that one way to address that would be to have a high-level administrative assistant, and that's essentially what our EID's paralegal is. Most of her functions are administrative assistant in nature. Though she is a licensed paralegal and she's a notary, so she performs paralegal services for us. But that's not necessarily something that you would have. I don't know how common that is, frankly, but it's certainly a tremendous benefit to us.
Okay. All right. Scott mentioned seeing you at the Aqua conferences. I haven't had a chance to tell you how much I enjoyed that session on the Brown Act that you and your
Well, I lost a bet on that one, so I took the under on I think 5 attendees, or maybe it was 25. But when it comes to Brown Act, and I think the title of it was "Getting into the Weeds on the Brown Act," I said, nobody's even going to come, and it was packed. So thank you, I appreciate that. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
So
I think you could. A person like you could earn your pay just to keep board members out of the weeds.
Well, don't underestimate the importance of that role. I spend a lot of time. About a third of my time allocation goes toward, attending, preparing for, and communicating with board meetings and things like that. So
Is your answer, it depends, as often as it around here?
yeah, I guess I'm a lawyer, so yeah, I got to say that. But, thank you so much for having me, and if there's more other questions for me, I'm certainly happy to answer, but if nothing else, I'll turn it over to Ellen.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Brian, can I ask you one quick question? Just because we talked about this in San Diego, and so one thing that, one of the, I don't know if I'd say it's a downside necessarily, but one of the comments that you made that kind of been kicking around in the back of my head was and you touched on it a little bit, but there may be instances where department heads or other staff are coming to you with issues that aren't necessarily legal. And so things that we might have otherwise tried to figure out on our own, and maybe we were perfectly capable and we were able to handle it and do it on our own, and we didn't need to rely on an attorney. To what extent does it go too far to where you become a kind of a crutch? As opposed to, and so then you end up spending time on things that you didn't necessarily need to, and staff should have been able to figure out on their own.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a hard one to answer because it's really difficult to quantify. I do spend a lot of time with the general manager and the department heads on issues that aren't necessarily legal. I'll give you an example. Yesterday I was in a meeting on the district is undertaking a cost of services study right now because we're getting ready to go out with a Prop 218 notice in the next few months, and you've all been through
Yeah.
that. You know how painful that is. Very, very challenging. And so there is a legal component to that I play an important role in, and that is, reviewing the our Prop 218 compliance. I provide memoranda and other written materials to our general manager and board of directors, frankly, advising them on both process and substantive requirements associated with rate increases. But the meeting yesterday was more of a strategic one about, how are we going to go about doing this in a way that mitigates the potential protest number and gets a meaningful public participation and all of those things. So, it was an hour meeting. It wasn't, we didn't really talk, we didn't get into the weeds about Prop 218. It was more of a strategic one. But we came out of that meeting with a little bit of a different direction than what I think the general manager and his department heads had been thinking that we were going, based on some issues that I thought weren't necessarily legal, but were something to sort of consider to maybe head off potential criticism in the future about, are you hiding the ball? Why aren't you understand? So I'm being a little bit vague here because obviously I have attorney-client privilege, but the point is that your in-house general counsel, should you choose to go down that path, will invariably spend time on matters that aren't necessarily legal, but that may benefit from some strategic, consulting. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but
I can think of something, because Dave Egerton was here when we had our 218, and he guided us through, talking about the points that you made and how, to handle it with the public, with our ratepayer, and so you guys come from a good source.
oh no, I've been associated with Dave all my career.
Great, awesome. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Ellen, do you have any thoughts to share?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I did work for Downey Brand for 5 years, and I remember coming
You
up
were
here
right
and
over there.
digging through
You
your
were right over
files,
there.
and yeah, it was a long time ago. But I definitely cut my teeth, and I enjoyed working for water districts a lot, and so I think that's how I eventually migrated to be in-house counsel at one. And I consider myself very lucky. It is a great relief not to work at a law firm that requires you to bill your hours by the 10th of an hour every 6 minutes. And so I feel like I've expanded in the breadth of my ability to engage in the water world a lot by being in-house counsel, and I think that's one of the benefits of having one. As you mentioned, just integrating someone into your team. Although they might be a lawyer in practice, they can also just provide a lot more breadth and build relationships with those in the water world, which I find are just as important sometimes as lawsuits. So I had about 9 years in private practice, and I worked for the firm that was outside counsel to my district. My district is very unique. We're very small, not in size, but in personnel. We consider ourselves lean and mean. So I report to my general manager and to my board, but in total we have about 20 employees and a budget of less than $2 million. And we operate pretty sleek to provide water to wetland habitat in our 65,000 acres. But we do have 160 60 landowners who I hear from occasionally, or maybe not so occasionally, more frequently than anything. So I actually have a slightly different arrangement because I lived in Sacramento and worked on Capitol Mall, and because we're a federal contractor, and so we have a lot of goings-on with the Bureau of Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife Service, and some of the federal agencies located in Sacramento. I still work from Sacramento. I have an office in our district down in Los Banos, and I go there about once a week. But I primarily work from Sacramento, and I work from my home office. And so I have a lot of email and phone call conversations. And as I was listening to you talk, I thought about some of the things that I do on a regular basis. So I just wrote a little list. I'll give you some examples of things I work on. I negotiate contracts. I engage in litigation to the extent that it's not a serious trial. So if we need to intervene in a lawsuit that affects us, I can do that. If we need to file a Friends of the Court brief, I will write that up. I also have some CCWD background, and so we do a lot of CCWD preparation and coverage, but also, if needed, defense and litigation. I do a lot of policy. I work with the state board a lot. I review state legislative bills that might affect our district and try to collaborate with others, and do federal waters policy, like I mentioned. So I travel to Washington, D.C. once or twice a year and engage with the way the Bureau of Reclamation manages their water storage and reservoirs, or how their different policy positions affect my district. Advise on the Brown Act a lot, and ethics, FPPC, do water rights filings with the board, and just project planning. So for example, we recently finished a water recirculation project, and it required CCWD, it required NEPA, it required agreements with the Bureau of Reclamation, it required a stream bed alteration permit from Department of Fish and Wildlife, and it required the negotiations of easements with several of our landowners. So that was a lot, just a lot to take on for a small project, even, that I was able to handle in-house. I think that in general, the water world has migrated and shifted from a world that was dominated by engineers maybe 30, 40 years ago to a world that I wouldn't say dominated by lawyers, but requires a lot more legal thought because of the increasing regulation of everything. We handled SIGMA. We're uploading our SIGMA plan right now, groundwater plan. We're subject to the irrigated lands program of the regional board and a lot of water quality requirements from the regional board. And in my perspective, it just seems to be getting more and more that you need that regulatory compliance and legal thought into a lot of different aspects of water. But I also really love science, and I really love strategy and policy, and so I'm able to dabble a lot. I think it depends on who you get, what their personality is like, and what their strengths are, but I do tend to work with our consultants on some of our groundwater science, and whatever I feel like I can contribute, as long as the general manager wants me to do it. I work very closely with him, and so I did want to make a point that I think that's very important, that you have the support of your general manager for if you desire to hire general counsel, because they will work very closely together. But sometimes I need to go into closed session with just my board. And so I do, that occasionally. If there's a personnel matter that we can handle without going to our labor council, I'll just go into closed session with the board. And speaking to the point about taking on things that maybe staff did before, that does happen. We recently lost our water master, our longtime water master, and so I've taken on the role of filing our water rights filings every year with the state board, and I think, that probably would have been done by staff. I also now find myself writing resolutions for the board, and I think that was an administrative job before, but now I just do it. So it's an evolving position, but it's very full-time. I feel like I have plenty of work all the time to do. But it's also very fulfilling, and I don't know if I mentioned it, but I'm just very loyal to my district, and I feel like I have a very strong sense of their needs and priorities, because I only have one client instead of at the law firm when I had 10 or 15 at a time.
Do you work 40 hours a week?
Yeah, probably more like 45 or 50.
Really?
I take
Okay.
weekends off, and frankly, the lifestyle of being able to shut off a little bit has helped me maintain that, and is one of the benefits of working in-house.
And how many member board do you have?
5-member board. We also have a resource conservation district that's coextensive with our district, and so I kind of report to them as well and attend their board meetings. That's an additional 5 members.
How do you communicate with so many landowners?
Our district or myself?
Well, you know, your district, yourself?
Well, we just decided to go out with a monthly or a quarterly newsletter. We stopped doing that a while back, and I'll probably have a hand in drafting some of that, just as an example of some of the side things that I do. We have an annual landowner meeting that I speak at, and I keep myself pretty open and available. I usually only interact with our landowners if there's some sort of water or easement or property dispute that the district, you know, needs to be involved with, or at least have a discussion.
My head is spinning here about what you do with your water. I mean, you're essentially, long before groundwater recharge was all the buzzwords, you were doing it.
Yeah.
So, do you have nearby agencies that are in critical overdraft that are looking to you to put water in the ground for them? I mean,
Yeah, we do. I sit on the coordination committee for our Sigma basin, and we interact with the sub-basins nearby us who have set different standards for their subsidence rates and their water depletion rates. And so, you know, that's one of the examples of something that it's a long-term thing that I will just have to stay involved with for years. But we do, I think our recharge does provide benefits to our neighbors and to the cities and communities nearby us.
well, I've been trying to figure out a way to monetize the excess water. I mean, we're not using all the water that we have, quote, rights for. It sounds like that you have water rights too. So has your agency figured out how to make money on the excess water you might have?
Yeah, I mean, our district is unique. We have more water than money. We are surrounded by districts that have more money than water. But what I've been working with my general manager on, and this is getting a little bit afield, but it's something that I've really invested some time in, is partnerships whereby those districts invest in projects, like the recirculation project I talked about. That was an investment from an outside district, and the way that we are repaying them for their investment is with water. And so that requires a lot of contracts, a lot of meetings and thought, and a lot of negotiation with the agencies that oversee our contracts and our water rights. And so that's an example of one of the more complex things that we've been involved with recently.
Were you involved in water transfers, or are you?
Yes, I am. Unfortunately,
that was a big buzzword.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're wildlife refuges, we have to go through the Bureau of Reclamation, so it adds another layer of complexity to that, and it also adds NEPA, that kind of thing. But yes, we do. That's an ongoing thing. And water storage is a big thing. I sit on the legal board for the Los Vaqueros project, and we're involved with the Sites Reservoir discussions and other projects. So it's just, this position allows me to be that expansive and to really dabble in all of those different projects that might someday bring benefit to our district.
So that having an office in Sacramento serves you very well.
I think it does. Yes, I think it does.
If you've got to keep all those fires lit or pot stirring.
Yep. I was just downtown this morning at a meeting, so it helps to, and it alleviates the pressure on my general manager to have to come to Sacramento. Our district is 2 hours away, so he's making a lot of trips there, and so we kind of balance it out. I go down there when needed. I was just there all day with 2 members of the State Water Board yesterday, giving them a tour of the wetlands, talking to them about regulatory coverage and things like that. And that's something I don't think a law firm lawyer would really give you, because you'd have to pay them for the whole 10 hours it took me, so, yeah.
Well, the two entities, very different needs, but very valuable in-house for both entities that I see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're kind of a Goldilocks district of the two.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellen.
So, yeah, thank you both. The one recommendation I have for Ellen, I looked at the website for Grassland Water District, and they have pictures of each of the staff members on the website, and I think almost all of them, except for you, have some dead animal in the picture with them that they had recently shot.
It's been suggested
Like-
we change that.
like-
And then there's the culture is strong in my district.
And then there's the picture of Ellen in front of the Capitol. I'm like, where's the ducks? Where's the... So anyway, just something you might want to think about. And if it's okay, President Underhill, I know we've taken up a lot of your afternoon already, but I didn't require it, but I did ask members of the management staff to be here to hear this, because I think it's a really important discussion that affects
absolutely.
all of us. And so nobody required to share any insight, but if we could open it up and just see if anybody else has any thoughts, or if you have any questions directly for the folks that are here, I think this might be a good time to
No,
explore
absolutely.
that.
Do we have someone who would like to share?
Charles loves the podium, so everyone's.
But Damon beat him to it, so.
Well, we'll have another conversation at some point.
Then this is one of your last chances to pick Peter's brains.
I mean, I would just like to add that I do definitely see a benefit from the operation side of things. You know, oftentimes we can run into some sort of regulatory compliance issue or some sort of wastewater discharge or treated water pipeline break where I might need some insight pretty readily and pretty quickly, and somebody that has the benefit of a deep understanding of the district would be beneficial. So I can definitely see that. You know, my mind's kind of spinning on all the different options or scenarios or processes that, you know, that I could benefit from being able to kind of bounce things off House Counsel. So I do definitely see room there from the operations perspective. Yep.
Well, I agree. I think that it definitely would, way different. You guys do way different things for your districts, and it's just interesting to see, and I think you're right, Damon. I think we are somewhere in between with I mean, not quite as big as EID, we're more similar to EID, and yeah, it is a good question. What are we going to do going forward on this, Michael? Are we continuing to look at it, wait and see what happens with water resource position, or what's the time frame on looking or filling this position?
That's what I was just about to ask you guys.
Okay.
Well, what I,
Well, we don't have a specific timeline here necessarily. We did actually kind of accelerate the timeline a little bit because of Peter's departure. I remember talking to Rebecca about it a few months ago, and we thought, well, maybe this is something that we'll bring to the board, you know, towards the end of budget prep before the next fiscal year, and maybe explore it then when we have some time to play with the numbers. But I think that kind of accelerated our interest in exploring this. So we don't have a specific timeline here. We can continue to work on what the positions would look like if the board wants to see the job descriptions of the different players that are the moving pieces here. We can bring together some job descriptions from other agencies. We can talk to more folks. We can you know, we can just continue building on this discussion here if it's the pleasure of the board to go that
I think we
route.
should, you know, have Peter's current job description, and you create the one that you think would work for the, not the manager, but the technician position. And I think that would help us if we decide to go forward, what options, you know, have you do the exercise of seeing how those needs could be met without losing anything. And I'd like more time to think about it, just,
Sure.
you know, mull it over, and let's discuss it again, and at some point.
yeah, I'd like to ask Peter for a quick response to how you would have felt had you had legal counsel.
You know, so there's times where I am reluctant to utilize Dave Cameron's time for a lot of stuff that's just kind of information gathering and things like that. So a good example is Michael and I were looking at the contract for Hogan and the REMAT program, and looking at that, and you know, questions came about what specifically parts of the existing power purchase agreements and things like that, you know, would need to be looked at by legal counsel to come up with an answer about certain aspects of whether or not it would be a good fit. And quite frankly, I just never really got around to it because I was so busy with other things. And it would be nice if you could have like a counsel or somebody like that to be there at the beginning and start to pull together a lot of those things in the contracts and look at it together with somebody strategically and be dedicated to that, because you know, I never felt like I wanted to, because outside legal counsel is very expensive.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
And so I never wanted to leap into anything unless I had done as much as I possibly could at the ground floor before handing it off to him. And especially when when you're talking about things of strategy where you don't know if it's gonna pan out or if it's gonna make money for the district or, you know, it's gonna pay itself back. You don't necessarily want to spend a lot of your legal budget on those kinds of things. You want them to be available for those kinds of things. And then another good example is, you know, when these documents are being developed, like the Habitat Conservation Plan and the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, you know, as a water resource manager, I would go through and I'd flag as much as I possibly could, but you know, that legal counsel comes in behind you and also flags other things too, that they may be worried about the way they're applied, that they have a much different approach than someone like me, where I'm looking strictly at, are the models correct, you know, are the inputs in and out correct, and things like that. You know, I'm more focused on the detail of it, but then it's nice to have that legal counsel look over your shoulder and say, okay, everything shakes out, how's this gonna affect the individual agencies or whatever in that groundwater sustainability plan. So I did utilize the external counsel for those kinds of things, and that is something that no matter whose background it would be, if they had a legal background, they could come in and do that kind of thing, right? And then, yeah, I think in general, you know, just there's always going to be possibly a need for that outside counsel on water resources, you know. We did have Kevin O'Brien at one time for a long time, but you know, as things went on, we asked actually for a more junior associate over there at Downey Brand, because we knew we were going to start using more time. So you know, maybe instead you check in with somebody that's more strategic or higher level on occasion from somebody like Downey Brand. So maybe you would ask Kevin O'Brien to come in for a very special or you know, important thing that comes on, maybe when you've gotten your water right permits to a point, and you know there's needs to be some serious back and forth or negotiations, then that you can use them for that. But really, the council in-house would be focused more on just the day-to-day and moving projects forward. So there's some benefit there, but I can't remember what your question was. But,
you were answering
you know,
it.
you
probably
think
answered
about
it.
the types of things that come up, and then yeah.
Sounds like you're in favor of it.
Uh-huh.
Well, no,
It would be a benefit.
no, I'm not at all. I mean, you know, it's just a matter of finding the right fit. You may go out for this recruitment and find somebody that is fantastic and perhaps maybe even has more experience than I do. And so, you know, you've got to look at this as an opportunity, though, and the fact that, you know, I'm departing, there's other options and things like that. So I think, you know, just keep all your options open at this point. If I were you, I don't think, you know, you should come out of this conversation based on his conclusion that with any, you know, feelings on one way or the other on this. So, yeah.
Well, I'm going to throw my 2 cents in and try and get this thing wrapped up here, and try and stay at 30,000 feet and looking at the thing.
Oh, yeah. That's
Why do you always say that?
yeah.
Because that's where we're supposed to be. That's where we're supposed to be.
It's gotta be 30,000.
No, you got to be 30,000.
I'm more of a
If you sit up here, see the difference between the regular
level.
ground and where you sit right now? That's a significant, anyway.
He's getting so old, he can't even see the ground from the top.
Is that what this is all about?
The staffing option 2, I think you're, Michael, you kind of threw it out as we're talking about it. It kind of sounded like, and even if we don't have somebody that's really, really good, sitting in the wings that we're talking to or that might apply for the job. I really do think a water resource manager is very important for this district. And getting rid of that position to get general counsel, I don't agree with. And I think we should, if we look for a water resource manager and happens to be a member of the bar, wow, what a coup that would be. But I don't think that's going to be the case. But the staffing option one that you're looking at, I think if we continue to look at that and not replacing Robbie, but putting someone else in there or not, and you taking all of his things and dividing them up. But I'm pretty sure we're going to bring someone on. If we bring someone on as general counsel, they're going to be doing other stuff. Well, like Brian talks about, he does right now, but there's going to be a lot more stuff with our guy, our gal, whatever. But I think if we continue to look at that, I don't know what your time frame. I guess that's more of a. But I'd like to see us focusing on replacing Peter's position and not meandering around with this stuff at this point. But that's just my 2 cents.
I agree with that, with what Scott said.
And that's the approach we took. We didn't feel like there was, we were at a point where we could hold off on Floyd guys. So that job has already been posted. We're already starting to see some activity in response to that. So that is currently the direction we're going in, because honestly, beyond today, I didn't have a plan because I wasn't sure if the feedback from the board was going to be, no, this is a terrible idea. Let's scrap it and move on. And so and like I said, we're not under any particular deadline here necessarily. It's not like we have an issue with Matt that we feel like we need to replace him. So we have the luxury of time here, and it is a really big decision that we want to get right. So I think based on the feedback from the board, we'll continue to develop in particular, and your assessment is right, Director Adamman, that in developing that second option, kind of talked myself out of it. And so we really appreciate that feedback, and we'll continue to develop that option.
Okay,
Yeah,
Russ?
we have a number of people, entities that we have to answer to on this board, and you two, ratepayers, and to a large extent our union employees. And I suspect that there will be, unless we can make a compelling argument for hiring a lawyer, an in-house lawyer, to sort of head off in advance the criticism that might come our way. Well, then why are you spending so much money for more? You're getting too heavy on the administration, the burden of administration or the cost of administration versus operations. There's always this trade-off, or one group thinking that they're being neglected. So that's similar to the 218 outreach that you have to do. We heard that constantly at our public outreach meetings. As you wouldn't have to raise rates if you didn't pay your director so much money. So
Right. I'm glad you raised that point, and it's something that we're going to be scrutinized for, absolutely. So we would need to be prepared for that and make the case that this is largely replacing. We have a general counsel already,
And that is going to be crucial.
Right, so it's largely replacing that and what we think is added value for the amount that we're spending on that position already. But we would have to get out in front of that. I did give the union leadership a heads up, just because I don't want, this was a public noticed meeting. I don't want to take them by surprise on anything. And so they know that we're having this discussion. They seem to understand the rationale behind it, but obviously we would have much more in-depth conversations with them if we were to move this forward.
Well, if it could be demonstrated to them, and I think it would be easier to do, that this is going to be a beneficial step for the team, the
Right.
brand. It's not them them against us or anything like that. The other thing I wanted to ask Peter is that, Peter, for about a year and a half, there was a Post-it note on these files back here that said, "Peter, file these things." Did you get that done?
I did. I just took the sticker off though.
Problem solved.
No, I did finally go through all this files.
Good for you.
I think a year and a half is conservative.
Good, good response. The other comment that I wanted to make is that Rebecca, I was touched by what you said, that, this would be great if I didn't have to deal with these daily things that somebody else could do. I mean, I value what you do for us so much. I don't want you distracted by trying to answer legal questions, so.
Yeah, and I mean, there's even things like, and he had brought it up, there's some risk things that you're getting involved in. And so even from that aspect, there are claims that come to us, and Michael and I are looking at them like, oh, we're like debating, well, this is what I think, well, this is what I think. And it, two things. Number one, well, yes, he has a legal background. That's not what we want him to be spending a ton of his time on. And I don't have a legal background, but, I do a lot of research. But it would be nice if we could just have that set of eyes to say, from a district's perspective, here's how I can defend this. If that's what you choose to do, whether you settle it or you take a hard line and say, no, we're not, we're gonna deny it. And that we can have backing on that. And then that protects the board and it protects the district. And so that builds consistency in what we're doing. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in my whopping 3 months that I've been here, is there's just been inconsistencies when you go after, when things start bubbling up to the surface now, where you go, well, this one was handled this way, and this one was handled that way, and this one was handled some completely different way, where that council kind of helps lend itself to that consistency and a backing that you can stand by. And that's where I see a huge benefit. Also, for operations, I think a huge benefit in that contract review. We expect our staff a lot to get involved in that kind of contract negotiation in terms that we are trying to not pass those things off to outside counsel because it's very expensive. So when you take the 132,000 divided by the average 400, we're getting like 330 hours compared to an in-house counsel. We could get, well, we were joking yesterday, we'll get like 2,500 hours. But we're gonna get like 2,600. But 2,080, right? So you're getting, for outside counsel, we're getting like 16% of a person. But we're paying almost $133,000 a year. So I just think that there is a huge value add to everything that we do here.
The other thing I've heard from almost every staff member that's approached the microphone is that there are things that we didn't go to outside counsel on that we should have because we don't want to spend the money. Mm-hmm. So that's 132,000. If we were running things properly or taking care of all risks or things that could affect us in the future, that probably would be a much larger number.
Yeah, please. Could I just, I don't want to belabor this, but I just wanted to follow up on that last point Rebecca made. So one thing that you might consider, and I'm happy to share, whatever information that you may or may not find useful, but in terms of managing risk, one thing that I've instituted first of all, we have a dedicated risk analyst, and you may or may not have that person here, but her job is to handle the claims as they come in. But she and I meet weekly, and we review the claims and so forth. One of the things when I came into my job noticed was that not only do we have people making claims against us, but there was a lot of circumstances happening out in operations. For example, a contractor would back into one of our, fire hydrants. Thank you, and we immediately started to go to the recovery mode. So for example, I just got a report from her yesterday morning that says in 2019 she was able to recover $40,000 from contractors stealing water or, these kind of incidental things. So, there may be opportunities, that aren't reflected in the numbers there where you would actually make money back. You know, and another very good example is a case that my deputy handled last year where, you know, she drafted an appeal that went to FEMA, and we ended up getting $2 million more than what we had anticipated in recovery from FEMA that arose out of an emergency. So there are, you know, sometimes circumstances arise where you actually do add some value, and those numbers, you know, they don't tell the whole story. You know, in terms of handling risk, one of the things that I'm very proud of is how much we've been able to reduce our annual insurance premiums, both in terms of the workers' comp and also on our property and general liability, because we so closely scrutinize our claims. And I think you guys are also with Aqua JPIA. You have a lot of ability to really, you know, I mean, I'm not trying to say you control your own destiny when it comes to claims, because, you know, you're always going to have line breaks, you're always going to have damage, third-party damage claims and things of that nature. But to the extent that you can very closely manage those, you have an opportunity through JPIA to really mitigate, you know, what your liability is on an annual basis for your property and general liability claims. So something also to mitigate.
Damon, did you have something you wanted to add quickly?
No, it was just, you were touching a nerve. Recently, we had a PG&E issue, so I file a claim with PG&E, and PG&E denies the claim, and I'm now in the circular morass of dealing with PG&E and trying to push the claim through because I disagree with their denial of the claim. Right, so it's like I'm hearing this going, yes, 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 and I have like 4 or 5 of those items going on, and Rebecca and I are coordinating, you know, reporting it to JPIA, and so it's just kind of touching the nerve.
And what's your legal background?
Well, David, I will say, you know, I love working with our director of operations. He and I work he's in my office literally all the time, whether it's a line break or whether it's, you know, it's complicated operations, and you never know what's going to happen. Something always new is coming up and novel, and so, you know, I appreciate, and, you know, if and when you do decide to hire outside counsel, he or she would be very appreciative of an operations director that's saying, hey, I need your help, before it turns into a big mess. Right?
Brian, before you step away, we have been trying to, I don't want to use the word patch relationships with the county administration for a number of years. There was a time that there were armed silos, you know, from CCWD, you know, going back and forth. But in your capacity over at El Dorado County, do you work in close proximity to the county at all, or do you have the county council on your speed dial, or?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, El Dorado County Council and I are close and professionally. A lot of respect for him. We have had a lot of interaction over the years. Not all of it was us on the same side of the table. In fact, last year he and I were able to resolve a fairly significant conflict that had arisen on a construction project, a road bridge project that the county was undertaking that significantly threatened one of our water conveyance facilities, and the county just didn't appreciate that in the planning prospect and the planning aspect. So it was a years-long conflict between EID and the county
we've been there.
that ultimately, and very grateful for El Dorado County Council, very reasonable person, but of course he has a client that he has to advocate on behalf of. Ultimately, we were able to avert litigation. We spent a number of meetings together with high-level staff from the county DOT and obviously from EID Engineering Department, but yeah.
Well, I could easily see how that negotiation, if you want to call it that, or that method of resolving that conflict, was handled much better than it would have been to have Matt Weber call our county council and try to work that out. I mean, the personal relationship and the fact that both of you work for a county agency, I think, is significant. Maybe naive to think that, but
I am an EID ratepayer. I live in EID service area. I, like Ellen, I feel very loyal to my agency, and I also am a member of the community. Tomorrow I'll be at a charity fundraiser for one of the county's large nonprofit organizations because I serve on their board. And so I interact with the Board of Supervisors and in that capacity. I'm lucky in that regard. You know, all of us up here in the foothills, you know, don't have the luxury that maybe other agencies in more urban areas have in terms of the availability of staff resources. But I do feel very lucky in that regard, and I think it benefits EID and the county, frankly, to have that kind of dynamic.
Well, the last thing I want to say is just, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming and you, Ellen, coming to share your thoughts and experiences with us. It's very thoughtful of you to do that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that, Michael, you get the thank you notes out to them.
Who's going to do that?
You'll get on that. We don't have enough time.
Your parting
We don't
gifts.
have general counsel, so we're really stressed about time, but no, absolutely. I can't thank.
Reported on my.
Yeah, right. Can't thank you guys enough.
Thank you
Yes,
very, very much,
yes.
both of
Really
you.
appreciate it. So yeah, unless there's other questions, we can get our weekend started.
Okay, well, we did have quickly board reports.
I'll wait till next week.
No?
Nothing,
Okay,
nothing, and nothing.
Well, I'll just have the,
I've got a- I've got-
on Wednesday.
No.
I've
Cindy
got
wants to
prepared
talk.
remarks.
Cindy wants to talk.
I was just gonna say, at the IRWM meeting on Wednesday, it was really a great meeting, but, it was a joint JPA and WAC.
Yeah.
And so I'm the treasurer now, and I'm also going to represent our IRWM when I'm at Aqua.
Good.
Meaning that I bring back information to IRWM. when I
You're
go.
going to Aqua?
So yes, I'm going. I knew you'd like that.
Russ?
No, I have nothing to report.
I'll hold off till Wednesday.
Oh, okay.
For my comments.
Well, I just had to report that we had over a foot of snow last night. Snowed for about 12 hours. I'm at 5,100 feet. I'm not at 30,000, but, you know, I'm close.
Michael, Stacy walked out before she had did she share with you any thoughts on this?
I missed, there was one of the slides, I missed some punctuation. She had some thoughts on the presentation. No, but kidding aside, we haven't talked about it at great length yet. I think from her perspective, you know, when it comes to the major employment issues, we're probably still going to rely on Gage and Lever Cassidy.
Yeah.
But it's so no, I don't want to speak for Stacy. I really want the board to have her input, and but I haven't talked to her about it at length yet.
So we're in a holding pattern and you're doing what you're doing.
We'll get it.
Okay.
We'll get back to you. Yeah. Yes, we are moving forward on that.
And we'll talk about it again. In my opinion of this, if it went forward, what helped me was knowing that it was a position that the board, it reported to the board. The idea of having another employee, I was not real thrilled about. But if it was something that was another employee of the board, especially with being legal, I lean towards that as being very important for me to make a decision.
And, yeah.
Great.
Get a consensus. Okay. Next board meeting, Wednesday, January 22nd, regular board, Wednesday, February 12th, 2 days before Valentine's Day, regular board meeting. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Hey, Rebecca, can I just leave this in my